The bridge of the Stellar Crown hummed with quiet efficiency as the massive exploration vessel glided through the empty darkness of space. Captain Kethfer stood at the center of the command deck, his tall blue form radiating the confidence that came from commanding one of the most advanced ships in the Zephyrian fleet. His 6 arms moved gracefully across the control panels, each gesture precise and practiced. "Report," Kethfer commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Science Officer Yiltaran looked up from her station, her large black eyes reflecting the glow of her screens. "Long-range sensors are detecting an unusual energy signature in Sector 7. The pattern is unknown, but it appears to be artificial." Kethfer moved to stand behind her, studying the readings with interest. In his 300 years of exploration, he had encountered dozens of alien species, most of them primitive civilizations barely capable of leaving their home worlds. The galaxy was full of such races, stumbling around in crude metal boxes they called starships. "Distance?" he asked. "Approximately 2 light hours, sir. The signature is weak and intermittent, suggesting possible damage to whatever is generating it. Bring us closer. Full scan when we reach optimal range." The Stellar Crown changed course, its advanced propulsion system moving the kilometer-long vessel through space without even the slightest vibration felt by the crew. Within minutes, their destination appeared on the main viewing screen. "By the ancient stars," whispered Navigator Feldan, his usual composure cracking slightly. "What is that thing?" The object floating before them barely deserved to be called a starship. It was a crude assembly of metal plates welded together in what appeared to be a hasty construction job. Scorch marks covered its hull, and several sections showed signs of emergency repairs using primitive techniques. The vessel was small, no larger than one of their shuttlecraft, and looked like it had been built by children playing with scrap metal. "Fascinating," Yiltaran said, her scientific curiosity overriding her disgust at the primitive construction. "The design is completely inefficient. Look at those thruster configurations. They must waste enormous amounts of energy just to achieve basic propulsion." Chief Engineer Lokthara snorted with amusement. "The hull thickness is laughable. Any decent plasma weapon would cut through that like tissue paper. What kind of civilization builds ships from such weak materials?" "A desperate one, Security," Chief Vaxmoran observed. "Look at those weapon courts. They have been used recently and extensively. This ship has seen combat." Kethvar studied the readings with growing interest. "Life signs? 1, Yiltaran confirmed. Weak but stable. The being appears to be in some form of suspended animation. Primitive stasis technology, by the looks of it. Species identification? Unknown. But the life signs match reports we have received about a race called humans. They are supposedly a young species that recently achieved interstellar travel. Very primitive, according to all accounts." The bridge crew exchanged amused glances. Humans were something of a joke among the advanced civilizations. Stories circulated about their crude technology, their violent tendencies, and their apparent inability to grasp even basic concepts of galactic diplomacy. "So this is human engineering," Kethver mused, walking closer to the viewing screen. "Even worse than the reports suggested. How did they manage to achieve spaceflight with technology this primitive? Probably through sheer stubbornness," Lokthara laughed. "I have heard they are too stupid to realize when something is impossible." "Sir," Communications Officer Marilane spoke up, "I am detecting writing on the hull. Human symbols, I believe. The vessel appears to be named ... Frontier Hope." "How quaint," Vaxmoran said. "They name their metal coffins." Kethvar continued to study the derelict ship. Despite its crude appearance, something about it intrigued him. The emergency repairs showed a level of ingenuity that was almost impressive. given the limited resources the builders had to work with. Someone had fought hard to keep this vessel operational. Dr. Murthek, he called to the ship's xenobiologist. What is your recommendation regarding the survivor? The elderly scientist looked up from his research station, his expression thoughtful. From a scientific standpoint, this presents a rare opportunity. We have heard much about humans, but have never had the chance to study one directly. A specimen could provide valuable data about this primitive species. Specimen? Yiltaran raised an eyebrow. You speak as if it were some kind of laboratory animal. Given their level of development, the comparison is not entirely inappropriate. Dr. Murthek replied without humor. Based on all reports, humans are barely more advanced than the Stone Age civilizations we studied in the Outer Rim. Sir, Vaxmorn interjected, should we not be concerned about potential contamination or security risks? Kethver waved a dismissive hand. What possible threat could a single primitive pose to a ship like ours? Our shields could withstand attacks from entire fleets of vessels more advanced than that derelict. The human might carry diseases unknown to our medical systems, the security chief pressed. Easily contained, Dr. Murthek assured him. Our medical facilities are more than capable of handling any primitive pathogens. Besides, the opportunity to study a living human is too valuable to pass up. Kethver made his decision. Bring the vessel aboard. Place it in Cargo Bay 7 and establish a containment field around it. Prepare medical and scientific teams for first contact protocols. Sir, Yiltaran said, reviewing her scans, the human stasis system appears to be failing. Life signs are becoming stronger. I believe the being is beginning to wake up. Excellent timing, Kethver smiled. We can observe the revival process and study the creature's reaction to discovering it has been rescued by a superior civilization. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency to bring the human vessel aboard. Tractor beams guided the primitive ship into the massive cargo bay, where it looked even smaller and more pathetic, surrounded by Zephyrian technology. Containment field is active, Vaxmorn reported. The area is secure. Life signs are strengthening rapidly, Dr. Murthek observed, studying his medical scanners. The human will be fully conscious within minutes. Kethver nodded with satisfaction. Assemble the contact team. Let us go meet our new pet. I am curious to see how a primitive mind reacts to encountering true civilization for the first time. As the Zephyrian crew prepared for first contact, none of them noticed the way the human vessel's hull had been scarred, or realized that the emergency repairs had been made not by desperate survivors, but by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They saw only primitive technology and crude construction, missing entirely the signs that this ship had been built for stealth, for survival, and for war. In the cargo bay, warning lights flickered as the human stasis pod began its final revival sequence. The man inside had been sleeping for months, but his dreams had been filled with fire and death, and the screams of his crew as they died around him. Now he was waking up, and the Zephyrians who thought they had rescued a harmless primitive were about to meet something else entirely. The revival process completed with a soft hiss as the stasis pod opened, releasing a thin cloud of vapor into the air. Inside the crude metal chamber, Colonel Jake Morrison opened his eyes and began to assess the situation with the cold calculation of a man who had survived things that would have driven lesser beings insane. The Zephyrians waited outside their containment field, preparing to greet what they assumed would be a grateful and overwhelmed primitive. They had no idea that they had just awakened something that had been forged in the fires of humanity's endless wars, shaped by a lifetime of violence, and hardened by the knowledge that in a hostile universe, only the strong survived. The monster was awake, and it was ready to meet its new hosts. The cutting beam made short work of the human vessel's outer hull. Sparks flew as the Zephyrian boarding tools sliced through the primitive metal, creating an opening large enough for the contact team to enter. Dr. Murthek led the way, his medical. Scanners already active and recording every detail of the crewed ship's interior. Remarkable, he muttered, examining the rough welding and basic circuitry that lined the narrow corridors. The construction is even more primitive than our scans suggested. How did they manage to maintain life support with such basic systems? Behind him, Kethva and 3 security officers moved carefully through the cramped space. The ship's interior was a maze of exposed pipes, flickering lights, and makeshift repairs. Everything looked like it had been built by someone working with limited resources and unlimited desperation. The human is in the forward compartment, Dr. Murthek reported, consulting his scanner. Stasis pod is powering down. Revival should be complete any moment now. They found Jake Morrison sitting up in his stasis pod, moving slowly as the revival drugs worked their way out of his system. His eyes were already open, taking in the strange blue-skinned beings who had broken into his ship. The Zephyrians expected panic, fear, maybe even aggression. Instead, they saw something that made them uncomfortable. Calm assessment. Jake looked at each of them in turn, his gaze steady and measuring. He noted their weapons, their positions, the way they held themselves. His eyes lingered on the medical equipment Dr. Murthek carried, then shifted to study the security officer's armor and defensive postures. "Hello," Jake said quietly, his voice rough from the long sleep. "I assume you found my ship." Kethver stepped forward, using the slow, deliberate movements his people employed when dealing with primitive species. "Yes, little human. We are explorers of the Zephyrian Empire. You are safe now. We have rescued you from the void." Jake nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "That was kind of you. My ship took damage. I had to go into emergency hibernation." "Yes. We could see that your vessel was badly damaged," Dr. Murthek said, speaking slowly and clearly as if addressing a child. "Do not worry. You are among civilized beings now. We will take good care of you." "I appreciate that," Jake replied, slowly standing up from the stasis pod. The Zephyrians noted his movements with interest. Despite months in suspended animation, he showed no weakness or disorientation. His balance was perfect, his coordination smooth and controlled. "What happened to your ship?" Kethver asked, gesturing at the obvious battle damage visible throughout the small vessel. Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "We encountered something hostile. My crew didn't make it. I was the only survivor." The Zephyrians exchanged glances. The human showed no emotion when speaking of his dead companions, which they found puzzling. They expected grief, trauma, or at least some visible distress. Instead, Jake spoke with the flat tone of someone making a routine report. "What manner of hostile force?" Dr. Murthek inquired, his scientific curiosity overriding his bedside manner. "Unknown species, very aggressive. They appeared to feed on life energy somehow. We call them devourers, though I doubt that's their real name." Kethver made a dismissive gesture. Primitive species often encounter difficulties they cannot understand. What seemed hostile to you was probably just a misunderstanding. Advanced civilizations like ours have ways of dealing with such problems through diplomacy and superior technology. Jake studied the Zephyrian captain with an expression that might have been amusement. "That's possible, I suppose. You seem very confident in your abilities." "We have good reason to be," Kethver replied proudly. "The Zephyrian Empire has explored this galaxy for thousands of years. We have encountered many species, most of them far more advanced than your own. We know how to handle dangerous situations." "I'm sure you do," Jake said quietly. Over the following days, the Zephyrians moved Jake to guest quarters aboard their ship. They provided him with basic accommodations and began what they called cultural exchange sessions. In reality, These were thinly disguised examinations designed to study human psychology and behavior. Jake participated willingly, answering their questions with patience and apparent openness. He told them about Earth, about human history, about their recent expansion into space. The Zephyrians found his stories fascinating in the way scientists might find the behavior of a clever animal interesting. What concerned some of the crew was how quickly Jake adapted to their environment. Within hours, he had learned the basic layout of their ship. Within days, he was speaking their language with increasing fluency. Dr. Murthak had expected the learning process to take weeks, but Jake absorbed new information at a rate that seemed impossible for a primitive mind. The human is remarkably adaptable, the doctor reported to Kethver during one of their daily briefings. His learning capacity exceeds anything in our database for species at his level of development. Perhaps humans are slightly more intelligent than we initially assumed, Kethver suggested. Still, intelligence without wisdom or advanced technology is of limited value. During their conversations, Jake asked many questions about Zephyrian society, their technology, their military capabilities. He presented these inquiries as natural curiosity about his rescuers, and the aliens answered freely. They saw no harm in educating a primitive about the superiority of advanced civilization. "Your weapons systems are impressive," Jake commented. During one tour of the ship, "Plasma-based, I assume? Very efficient energy conversion. And your shields use some kind of gravitational field manipulation?" Kethver beamed with pride. "Exactly correct. We are pleased that even a primitive mind can appreciate superior engineering. Our defensive systems could withstand attacks from entire fleets of ships like your own." "I don't doubt it," Jake replied, studying the weapon emplacements with what seemed like innocent interest. Security Chief Vax Morin began to feel uneasy about their guest during the third day. There was something about the way Jake moved through the ship that bothered him. The human walked with a confidence that seemed out of place for someone who was supposedly overwhelmed by advanced technology. "He memorized our security protocols." "Within hours," Vax Morin reported to Kethver. "He knows the location of every weapon, every shield generator, every critical system on this ship." When I asked him about it, he claimed he was just naturally curious about the technology that saved his life. "You worry too much," Kethver dismissed. "What possible threat could one primitive pose to a ship like ours? Besides, his curiosity is natural. Imagine how overwhelming this must be for someone from such a backward civilization." But Vax Morin's concerns proved justified during a routine training exercise. Jake had asked to observe their security drills, claiming he wanted to understand how advanced civilizations maintained order. During the demonstration, one of their training drones malfunctioned and began moving erratically. Before any of the Zephyrian security officers could react, Jake stepped forward and disabled the drone with a single, precise strike to a junction point that even the ship's engineers had difficulty accessing. The movement was so fast and accurate that it left the aliens staring in shocked silence. "Sorry," Jake said calmly, stepping back from the deactivated drone. "I noticed it was overheating at that connection point. Seemed like it might damage something important if it kept running like that." Dr. Murthak examined the drone later and found that Jake had identified and exploited a design flaw that the Zephyrians themselves had not known existed. The human had spotted a weakness in their technology within seconds and had known exactly how to neutralize it. "How did you know where to strike?" the doctor asked Jake later. Jake shrugged. "Basic engineering principles. Energy flows, stress. Points, material fatigue. It's the same whether you're dealing with primitive human technology or advanced alien systems. Physics works the same way, everywhere." That night, several crew members approached Kethvar with their concerns. The human was not behaving like any primitive they had encountered before. His casual expertise in technical matters, his rapid adaptation, his unsettling calm in all situations, none of it fit the profile of a backward species barely capable of space travel. Perhaps we have underestimated human development, Yiltaran suggested during their private meeting. This individual shows capabilities that suggest his species may be more advanced than we initially believed. Kethver remained confident. One unusually intelligent individual does not represent an entire species. Besides, no matter how clever this human might be, he is still just one primitive being aboard a ship full of advanced warriors. What possible danger could he represent? None of them realized that Jake Morrison lay awake in his quarters each night, memorizing every detail of their ship, analyzing their weaknesses, and preparing for possibilities they could not imagine. He had answered their questions honestly, but they had not asked the right questions. They had not asked about his military training, his combat experience, or the fact that he was not just any human survivor, but one of humanity's most dangerous soldiers. The Zephyrians slept peacefully, confident in their superiority, while the monster they had rescued planned and waited, and prepared for whatever might come next. 2 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison came aboard the Stellar Crown, and the Zephyrian crew found themselves increasingly uncomfortable around their human guest. What had started as scientific curiosity was slowly turning into something closer. To unease, Dr. Murfeck reviewed his notes in his private laboratory, trying to make sense of the data he had collected. Every test, every scan, every observation pointed to the same impossible conclusion. This human was not what he appeared to. B. Computer, display human physical assessment files, he commanded. The holographic display showed Jake's medical scans in 3 dimensions. The bone density was far beyond anything Dr. Murfeck had seen in a species that supposedly evolved on a peaceful world. The muscle fiber composition suggested someone who had endured extreme physical stress over many years. Most disturbing were the scar's tissue patterns throughout Jake's body, evidence of injuries that should have been fatal. These readings cannot be correct, the doctor muttered to himself. No primitive species should show this level of physical conditioning. Meanwhile, in the ship's security center, Vax Morin was having his own concerns. He watched surveillance footage of Jake moving through the ship's corridors for the 100th time, analyzing every step, every gesture, every glance. "Chief, you need to see this," his assistant, Officer Baltar, called from another workstation. Vax Morin walked over to see what had caught his subordinate's attention. On the screen was a compilation of Jake's movements throughout the ship over the past 2 weeks. "Watch his eyes," Baltar said, pointing at the display. "He is not looking at things the way a curious visitor would. He is mapping everything. Exit, routes, weapon locations, power junctions, communication nodes. This is tactical assessment, not innocent exploration." Vax Morin studied the footage with growing alarm. The human moved through their ship like a predator studying its territory. Every question Jake had asked, every area he had expressed interest in visiting, every casual observation he had made about their technology suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. "Has Captain Kethvar seen this?" Vax Morin asked. "I presented my concerns yesterday. He dismissed them as paranoia. He believes one primitive human cannot possibly threaten an advanced Zephyrian vessel." Vax Morin was not so confident. Something about Jake Morrison set off every survival instinct he possessed, instincts that had kept him alive through 40 years of military service. That evening, Jake joined several crew members in the ship's recreational area. The Zephyrians had thought he might enjoy seeing how advanced civilizations relaxed and entertained themselves. Instead, Jake spent the time asking questions about their military history, their combat tactics, and their experience with hostile species. "Your people have been explorers for thousands of years," Jake observed, watching a group of young officers play a strategy game. You must have encountered dangerous situations. Occasionally, admitted Lieutenant Corveth, one of the ship's tactical officers. But our superior technology and diplomatic skills usually resolve conflicts before they become serious threats. Jake nodded thoughtfully. What about species that cannot be reasoned with? Beings that are fundamentally hostile, that see other life forms only as prey or resources to be consumed? The Zephyrians exchanged glances. Such species were rare in their experience, but they did exist. Most advanced civilizations had learned to avoid or contain such threats rather than confront them directly. We have protocols for such situations, Corveth replied carefully. Avoidance is usually the preferred strategy. If that fails, we have defensive measures. But no real combat experience, Jake said quietly. It was not a question. Combat is primitive, Chief Engineer Lokthara interjected with some irritation. Civilized beings resolve their differences through negotiation and mutual understanding. Jake was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the aliens uncomfortable. That works when both sides want to survive. It does not work when one side sees the other as food. Later that night, Yul Taran found herself reviewing sensor logs from the past week. Something had been bothering her about Jake's behavior, and she finally realized what it was. The human showed no signs of psychological trauma, despite claiming to be the sole survivor of a battle that killed his entire crew. Computer, analyze human stress indicators during discussions of crew death and ship destruction, she commanded. The results appeared on her screen within seconds. Jake's vital signs remained completely stable when discussing traumatic events. His voice patterns showed no emotional distress. His body language displayed no signs of grief or survivor guilt. Either this human has remarkable emotional control, she murmured, or these events did not affect him the way they would affect a normal being. Neither possibility was reassuring. The situation came to a head during what the crew had planned as a cultural exchange session. Jake had agreed to demonstrate some basic human physical techniques, which he described as recreational activities. From my world, the Zephyrians gathered in the ship's gymnasium, expecting to see primitive exercises or perhaps some crude athletic competitions. Instead, they watched Jake move through a series of combat forms that made their own security training. Looked like children's games. Every movement was precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. Jake demonstrated how to disable an opponent with minimal effort, how to use an enemy's own strength against them, and how to kill with bare hands in dozens of different ways. He presented these techniques as if they were casual hobbies, like dancing or swimming. These are just games humans play for fun? Asked Dr. Murthick, his voice barely steady. Basic fitness routines, Jake replied calmly. Every human child learns these movements. We call it martial arts. It helps keep us healthy and teaches us discipline. The watching aliens realized that what they were seeing was not recreation, but training for war. No peaceful species would develop such efficient methods of violence and teach them to children as a matter of course. On your world, Vaxmorin asked carefully, do all humans learn to fight like this? Jake considered the question. Fighting is not really the right word. We learn to survive. Earth is not a gentle place. Everything there is trying to kill everything else, including us. We had to become very good at staying alive. But surely your civilization has moved beyond such primitive concerns, Yul Taran suggested hopefully. Jake's expression grew distant. You cannot move beyond what you are. Humans are survivors because we had to be. Take away the cities, the technology, the comfortable life, and we are still the same species that climbed to the top of the food chain on a world full of monsters. The demonstration continued, and with each new technique Jake showed them, the Zephyrians became more aware. that they were not watching a primitive being trying to impress advanced aliens. They were watching a predator demonstrating its capabilities. When Jake casually mentioned that these were only the most basic techniques that human children learned, and that real combat training was far more advanced, several crew members excused themselves from the room. That night, Vaxmorn requested an emergency meeting with Captain Kethfer. He presented all of his evidence, all of his concerns, and all of his fears about their human guest. "Sir, I believe we have made a serious error in judgment," he concluded. "This being is not a primitive survivor. He is something else entirely. Something dangerous." Kethfer listened to the security chief's report with growing unease. The evidence was compelling, but accepting it meant admitting that his superior Zephyrian intellect had completely misjudged the situation. "Even if your concerns are valid," Kethfer said finally, "he is still just one being aboard a ship full of trained warriors. Our technology is still superior to anything his species possesses." Vaxmorn was not reassured. "Sir, I have reviewed combat footage from dozens of conflicts. Superior numbers and technology mean nothing if you do not understand your enemy. And I do not think we understand humans at all." As if summoned by their conversation, an alert sounded throughout the ship. Long-range sensors had detected 3 unknown vessels approaching at high speed. The ships used technology that matched no known species in Zephyrian databases. "Red alert," came the announcement over the communication system. "All crew to battle. Stations. Unknown vessels approaching with apparent hostile intent." In his quarters, Jake Morrison heard the alert and felt his blood turn cold. He recognized those energy signatures from his nightmares. The Devourers had found him, and the Zephyrians had no idea what they were about to face. The monsters he had been running from had caught up with him, and now these arrogant aliens were going to learn what real monsters looked like. But first, they were going to discover what kind of monster they had rescued from the void. The bridge of the Stellar Crown erupted into controlled chaos as the 3 unknown vessels dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Kethfer stood at his command station, studying the alien ships on the main screen with growing concern. They were unlike anything in Zephyrian databases, their hulls appearing to be grown rather than built, pulsing with a sickly organic light. "Analysis," Kethvar commanded, his confidence wavering for the first time in decades. "Unknown biomechanical technology." Yul Taran reported, her voice tight with worry. "Energy readings are off the scale. They appear to be scanning us with some form of invasive beam. Shields at maximum. All weapons online," Kethvar ordered. "Open communication channels." Before the communications officer could comply, Jake, Morrison's voice cut through the bridge activity like a blade. "Do not try to communicate with them." Everyone turned to see the human standing in the bridge doorway, his casual demeanor completely gone. The change in him was so dramatic that several crew members instinctively stepped back. Jake's eyes were hard and focused, his entire body radiating a lethal intensity that made the Zephyrians suddenly aware they were looking at something very dangerous. "How did you get onto the bridge?" Vaxmorn demanded, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Your security protocols have 17 different bypass methods," Jake replied, without taking his eyes off the main screen. "But that does not matter now. Those ships out there are Devourers. They do not want to talk. They want to feed." As if responding to his words, the alien vessels suddenly accelerated toward the Stellar Crown. Strange energy beams lanced out from their hulls, striking the Zephyrian ship's shields with devastating force. "Shields down to 60% with first contact," the tactical officer reported in shock. "How is that possible?" "They drain life energy," Jake said, moving to an empty console and beginning to work with frightening efficiency. "Your shields were designed to stop conventional weapons. These things feed on the energy that powers your ship. "Get away from that station," Kethvar ordered, but his voice lacked conviction. The human's fingers were flying over controls with an expertise that suggested intimate knowledge of Zephyrian technology. "Incoming projectiles," Yiltaron announced. They appeared to be some form of boarding pods. Jake's expression grew even more grim. "They are not pods. They are spawn. And when they get inside your ship, they will drain the life from every crew member they find." The first of the organic projectiles struck the Stellar Crown's hull with a wet, squelching sound that could be heard throughout the ship. Within seconds, alarms began sounding as hull breaches were detected in multiple sections. "Impossible," Lokthara gasped from her engineering station. "Those things are eating through our hull like it was paper." "Security teams to breach points," Vaxmorin commanded, but Jake was already shaking his head. "Your security teams will die," the human stated flatly. "Your weapons are not designed to fight these things. Your training is useless against an enemy that sees you as food." More spawn struck the ship, and the lights began to flicker as the Devourer's energy drain intensified. Several crew members collapsed as the life force extraction beams found them through the failing shields. Kethvar watched his advanced ship being torn apart by enemies. His superior technology could not stop. "What do you suggest we do?" he asked. Jake, his pride finally cracking under the weight of desperate circumstances. Jake turned from the console, and the Zephyrians saw something in his eyes that made their blood freeze. It was not fear or desperation. It was the cold calculation of a predator preparing to hunt. "I suggest you stay out of my way," Jake said quietly. Without another word, Jake Morrison left the bridge. Moving through the ship's corridors was deadly purpose. The transformation was complete now. The polite, curious human who had been their guest for 2 weeks was gone, replaced by something that moved like death itself to the familiar passages. Jake reached his quarters and opened a concealed panel in the wall, revealing equipment that the Zephyrians had never detected. Military-grade weapons, armor components, and devices whose purposes they could not even guess. He had been preparing for this moment since the day they rescued him. The first Devourer spawn Jake encountered was in Corridor 7, a writhing mass of tentacles and feeding organs that had already drained 3 Zephyrian crew members. The creature turned toward him, sensing fresh life energy to consume. Jake did not hesitate. Moving with inhuman speed and precision, he struck the creature in 3 specific locations that caused its biomechanical body to collapse into convulsing paralysis. The watching Zephyrians who had survived the initial attack stared in shock, as the human calmly finished off the spawn with a weapon they had never seen before. "How did you know where to hit it?" gasped Lieutenant Corvith, clutching a wounded arm. "Anatomy is anatomy," Jake replied, checking his weapon's charge level. "I have been studying these things for months. They have weak points, just like everything else." Word of Jake's success spread quickly through the ship's communication system. Crew members began to rally around him as he moved from section to section, systematically hunting down the invading spawn with ruthless efficiency. The Zephyrians watched in fascination and horror as their primitive guest became something out of their worst nightmares. Jake moved through their ship like he owned it, using their own technology in ways they had never imagined, turning their peaceful exploration vessel into a weapon of war. "Bridge to all sections." Kethvar's voice echoed through the corridors. "Follow the human's lead. He seems to know how to fight these creatures." But Jake was not just fighting the spawn inside the ship. He was preparing for something much more dangerous. Using his knowledge of Zephyrian technology and his understanding of Devourer tactics, he began modifying the ship's systems for an assault that no Zephyrian would have dared attempt. "What are you doing?" Dr. Murthek asked, finding Jake in the Dell main engineering section, rewiring critical ship systems. "Preparing to board their vessels," Jake replied calmly, his hands never stopping their work. "The spawn are just scouts. The real threat is the mother ships. We have to take them out before they call for reinforcements." "Board their ships?" Murthak's voice cracked with disbelief. "That would be suicide." Jake looked up from his work, and the doctor saw something in the human's eyes that made him step backward. It was not madness or desperation. It was the absolute confidence of a being that had spent its entire life learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than itself. "Doctor," Jake said quietly, "you have spent your life studying primitive species. Let me show you what primitives do when civilized beings cannot protect them." The ship shuddered as more devourer spawns struck the hull, but Jake was no longer concerned with defense. He had identified the lead vessel in the attacking formation, analyzed its weaknesses, and formulated a plan that would either save the stellar crown or destroy it in the attempt. As he prepared to leave the ship for an assault that violated every principle of civilized warfare, Jake Morrison began to show the Zephyrians what humanity really was. Not a primitive species stumbling around the galaxy in crude metal boxes, but the product of millions of years of evolution on a world where only the most efficient killers survived. The aliens who had mocked his vessel were about to learn why. Humans had earned their place among the stars, not through superior technology or advanced civilization, but through their willingness to become monsters when monsters were what the situation required. The monster was fully awake now, and it was going hunting. The silence that followed the destruction of the devourer ships was more unsettling to the Zephyrian crew than the battle itself had been. In the space of 2 hours, Jake Morrison had single-handedly eliminated a threat that their advanced civilization could not even comprehend, let alone defeat. Captain Kethver stood in the ruins of his once pristine bridge, staring at the debris field that had been 3 enemy vessels. Around him, his crew worked quietly to repair damaged systems, their movements subdued and uncertain. None of them looked directly at the human who sat calmly in a corner, cleaning alien blood from his improvised weapons. "Status report," Kethver said finally, his voice lacking its usual authority. "Hull integrity restored to 80%, Lokthar reported without her normal confidence. "Life support is stable. Weapon systems are extensively modified but functional." The modifications Jake had made to their ship still baffled the Zephyrian engineers. He had turned their exploration vessel into something that could punch through devourer bio-armor, using principles of physics and engineering that they had never considered. "Casualty report?" Kethver asked quietly. 17 crew members were drained by the spawn before the human eliminated them. Dr. Murthak replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Without his intervention, we would have lost everyone." Kethver finally turned to look at Jake, who was methodically checking each piece of equipment he had used during the assault. The human showed no signs of exhaustion, despite having fought through 3 alien ships filled with creatures that fed on life. "Energy." "How?" Kethver asked simply. Jake looked up from his work. "How what? How did you do any of this? How did you survive inside those ships? How did you know exactly where to strike to disable creatures we had never seen before? How did one primitive being accomplish what our entire crew could not?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of the aliens around him. They looked at him with a mixture of fear, awe, and confusion that he had seen before in the eyes of other species, who discovered what humans were capable of. "You made assumptions," Jake said finally. "You looked at my ship and saw primitive technology. You looked at me and saw a backward being from a young civilization. You were wrong about both." He stood up and walked to the main viewing screen, where the wreckage of the devourer ships still glowed with dying energy. My ship was not primitive. It was specialized, built for stealth, for survival, for fighting in places where advanced vessels like yours could not go. Every system was designed for one purpose, keeping me alive long enough to complete my mission. What mission? Taran asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Deep reconnaissance into Devourer territory. Mapping their breeding grounds, their supply routes, their weaknesses. Learning how to kill them efficiently. Jake turned back to face the Zephyrians. I was not a refugee you rescued. I was a soldier doing his job. Dr. Murthick stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. But your species is supposed to be primitive. All our data indicates that humans have barely achieved interstellar travel. Jake smiled, and the expression was not reassuring. Doctor, you have been in space for thousands of years. You have explored, you have cataloged, you have studied. But you have never really fought for your survival. He gestured toward the debris field outside. Humans have been fighting since before we could make fire. We fought predators. We fought each other. We fought our own planet. When we finally reached the stars, we found new things to fight. And we got very, very good at it. But the technology. Lokthara protested. Your ship was clearly inferior to ours. My ship did exactly what it was designed to do, Jake replied. It brought me here, it kept me alive, and it allowed me to complete my mission. Sometimes the best tool is not the most advanced one. Sometimes the best tool is the one that works. Vax Morin, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. You have been evaluating us since the moment you came aboard, have you not? Learning our capabilities, our weaknesses, our tactical responses. Of course, Jake said without hesitation. It is what soldiers do. We assess threats and opportunities. We gather intelligence. We prepare for every possible scenario. And what was your assessment? Kethfer asked, though he dreaded the answer. Jake considered the question carefully. You are not enemies. You are not a threat to human space. You are potential allies who have grown soft from too many years of peace and prosperity. The words stung, but the Zephyrians could not deny their truth. When faced with a real threat, their advanced technology and superior intellect had been useless. They had needed a primitive human to save them. What happens now? Dr. Murthick asked. Now I complete my report, Jake said, moving toward the communication station. I need to contact Human Command and inform them that the Devourer Advance Force in this sector has been eliminated. As Jake worked at the communications array, the Zephyrians heard him speaking in his own language to distant human commanders. The conversation was brief and professional, full of technical terms and tactical assessments that they did not understand. When he finished, Jake turned back to his hosts. A human patrol ship will be here in 3 days to pick me up. My mission is complete. Your mission? Yiltaran asked. The Devourers were using this sector as a staging area for attacks on human colonies. My job was to map their operations and eliminate their forward bases. The 3 ships that attacked you were the last of their advance force. Kethver stared at the human in amazement. You planned for them to find you. I hoped they would. My ship was damaged, but I could have repaired it and continued my mission. Instead, I decided to use your vessel as bait to draw them into a confrontation on my terms. The implications of this statement hit the Zephyrians like a physical blow. Jake had not been a helpless survivor they had rescued. He had been a weapon waiting for the right moment to strike, and he had used their ship and their crew as part of his battle plan. You could have told us, Vaxmorin said angrily. We could have prepared, could have helped. Jake shook his head. You would have tried to negotiate or run away. Civilized species always do. It would have prolonged the conflict and given the Devourers time to call for reinforcements. 3 days later, the human patrol ship arrived as promised. It was larger than Jake's reconnaissance vessel, but still appeared crude and primitive compared to Zephyrian technology. The crew that came aboard to collect Jake were polite but efficient, showing none of the wonder or curiosity that the Zephyrians had expected from a primitive species. As Jake prepared to leave, Captain Cuthver approached him one final time. "Will we see humans again?" he asked. "Eventually," Jake replied. "Humanity is expanding, and you are in our general direction of travel. When we meet again, it will probably be under more pleasant circumstances. What should we tell our government?" "About your species?" Jake considered this question carefully. "Tell them that humans are not primitive. Tell them that we are survivors who learn to thrive in a hostile universe. Tell them that we prefer to be allies rather than enemies." He paused at the airlock door and looked back at the Zephyrian crew one last time. "And tell them that sometimes the galaxy needs monsters to fight monsters. Humans volunteered for that job a long time ago." Jake Morrison walked through the airlock and onto his people's ship, leaving behind a crew of aliens who would never again make assumptions about primitive species or crude technology. They had learned that advancement and civilization were not the same thing, and that sometimes the most dangerous beings in the universe were the ones who chose to protect others rather than destroy them. As the human ship disappeared into hyperspace, the Zephyrians began the long journey home, carrying with them the knowledge that they shared the galaxy with something unprecedented, a species that had become monsters so that others did not have to.